Chapter 9. Struggle and Fight. When Joseph F. Smith returned from Europe in September 1906, Reed Smoot's future as a United States Senator was still uncertain. At the General Conference 5 months earlier, Francis Lyman had publicly announced the resignations of Apostles John W. Taylor and Matthias Cowley. Joseph Tanner was also released from his leadership positions. The resignations, along with the recent death of Apostle Mariner Merrill, had left 3 vacancies in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, which were filled by George F. Richards, Orson F. Whitney, and David O. McKay. The announcement of the resignations seemed to have a positive effect on many of Reed's colleagues in the Senate. "From all that I can hear," Reed had reported to church leaders, "the senators generally have taken the action of the last conference as an evidence of good faith on the part of the church, and especially of President Joseph F. Smith." That was not true of the members of the Senate committee assigned to the investigation, however, most of whom remained suspicious of the church. After closing their investigation, they voted to recommend removing Reed from office. The full Senate finally considered the matter in February 1907, 4 years after Reed's election first sparked an outcry. The committee had documented more than 3,000 pages of testimony from upward of 100 witnesses, hostile and friendly. As the senators reviewed this record, they also considered their personal interactions with Reed, who had gained the respect of many in Washington, D.C. Theodore Roosevelt, the President of the United States, was his staunch supporter and strongly urged the Senate to vote in his favor. When the senators finally ruled on the matter, they voted to disregard the committee's recommendation and permit Senator Smoot to retain his seat. Within a few days, Joseph F. Smith wrote to congratulate Reed and thank the senators for their fair-minded decision. He wished others could become better acquainted with the saints. "If this could be done, the current misunderstanding and widespread misrepresentation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints," he wrote, "would forever cease." A few weeks later, President Smith opened the April 1907 General Conference with more good news. "The tithes of the people during the year 1906 have surpassed the tithing of any other year," he said. "Today, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints owes not $1 that it cannot pay at once. At last, we are in a position that we can pay as we go." He praised the saints' faithfulness and commented, "We do not have to borrow any more, and we won't have to if the Latter-day Saints continue to live their religion and observe this law of tithing." After his sermon, President Smith invited Orson F. Whitney to read a public statement the First Presidency in the 12 had prepared about Latter-day Saint beliefs and values. The statement responded to many of the charges made against the church and its members during the Smoot hearings, but it also provided the saints with an official summary of basic gospel principles and practices. "Our religion is founded on the revelations of God," the declaration affirmed. "The gospel we proclaim is the gospel of Christ, restored to earth." The statement characterized the saints as an honest, open-minded, intelligent, and pious people. It also testified of their devotion to home and family, including monogamous marriage. "The typical Mormon home is the temple of the family," it stated. "The Mormon people have bowed in respectful submission to the laws enacted against plural marriage." The declaration also explained the principles of individual agency, tithing, and priesthood leadership, and it attested to the saints' patriotism, allegiance to earthly governments, and commitment to the separation of church and state. "We desire to live in peace and confidence with our fellow citizens of all political parties and of all religions," it proclaimed. The restored gospel sought to uplift society, the declaration stated, not destroy it. Our religion is interwoven with our lives. It has formed our character, and the truth of its principles is impressed upon our souls," it read. After Elder Whitney finished reading the Declaration, Francis Lyman voiced support for it on behalf of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. At the invitation of President Smith, the congregation then voted unanimously to adopt and sustain its message. On April 16, 1908, Jane Manning James, one of the earliest Black Latter-day Saints, passed away in her Salt Lake City home. She had come to the Salt Lake Valley with her husband and children in September 1847 as part of the first company of saints to follow Brigham Young's advance company west. Since then, she had become a well-known presence in the city. She was proud of her 18 grandchildren and her 7 great-grandchildren. She and her brother Isaac went to church meetings in the Salt Lake Tabernacle and often attended reunions of the church's old folks and pioneers. Her funeral was held in the Salt Lake City 8th Ward Meeting House. The chapel was crowded with Jane's friends, both black and white, who came to remember her life. The room was filled with flowers to honor Jane's faith and goodness of heart. Jane's friend, Elizabeth Roundy, read a short autobiographical sketch that Jane dictated to her a few years earlier. Jane had been born free at a time when slavery was still legal, and black people throughout the world were often treated as social inferiors. Her autobiography told the story of her conversion in the eastern United States, her family's nearly 800-mile walk to Nauvoo, and her experiences living with and working for the prophet Joseph Smith's family. It also recounted how Emma Smith had twice invited Jane to be adopted into her and Joseph's family. Near the end of her autobiography, Jane bore a fervent testimony. She had been widowed, had outlived all but 2 of her children and 10 of her grandchildren, and was nearly blind by then. Yet, she affirmed, "The Lord protects me and takes good care of me in my helpless condition, and I want to say right here that my faith in the gospel of Jesus Christ as taught by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is as strong today, nay, it is, if possible, stronger than it was the day I was first baptized." President Joseph F. Smith spoke at the funeral. Over the years, Jane had sometimes sought his help in receiving temple ordinances for herself and her deceased family members. She particularly longed to receive the endowment and be sealed to a family. But since the early 1850s, the Church had restricted saints of African descent from holding the priesthood or receiving any temple ordinance except baptism for the dead. Explanations for the restriction varied, but they were speculative, not the Word of God. Brigham Young had promised that all saints, regardless of race, would one day receive all the ordinances and blessings of the gospel. Like other black saints, Jane had done baptisms for her kindred dead. She had also asked to be endowed and then be sealed by proxy to Walker Lewis, one of the few black saints to hold the priesthood before the restriction took effect. On later occasions, she asked to be sealed by adoption into the family of Joseph Smith, but each time she petitioned for an endowment or sealing, Joseph F. Smith or another church leader had upheld the church's restriction. With the help of Relief Society General President Zina Young, however, Jane had received permission from church leaders to be joined for eternity with Joseph Smith's family. In response to her request, they had prepared a vicarious ceremony that joined Jane to the family as a servitor. Zina Young had acted as Jane's proxy in the ceremony, while Joseph F. Smith stood in for the prophet Joseph Smith. Although she felt dissatisfied with the ceremony, Jane had continued faithful. "I pay my tithes and offerings, keep the word of wisdom," she said. I go to bed early and rise early. I try in my feeble way to set a good example to all. In 1902, Jane asked Patriarch John Smith, Joseph F. Smith's older brother, when she would be allowed to receive her endowment. "Be patient and wait a little longer," he had said, assuring her that the Lord had his eye on her. He promised that the Lord would be far better to her than ever she had dreamed. To the end of her life, she retained a hope that she might one day receive all temple blessings. Following the funeral, Jane was buried